event this evening. It's fantastic to see many people on the call. My name's Sam Browse. I am an activist with Labour Friends of Progressive Latin America who are organising this event this evening alongside the Rise Festival. We're meeting at a really exciting time in Latin America and for the continent, as we've seen a wave of successful resistance to neoliberalism, a regime, a model of doing things that's often been backed to the hilt in the region by the US State Department. So this meeting today has rightly been characterized as discussing the rebellion against US empire. Thanks again for joining us. Just a bit of a rundown in terms of where we are in Chile. We've seen the recent election of Gabriel Boric, building on a wave of protests coming out of a campaign against cost of living crisis and transport costs in Santiago, which kind of generalized into a wider discussion and an outrage against the cost of living, privatization, and in Chile, which broadened out even further into a discussion of Chile's constitution. And led to a kind of the founding of a constitutional convention to throw out the kind of neoliberal constitution that was instituted in the '73 coup. So we've seen the kind of historic reversal go on in Chile. In Honduras recently, 13 years after a coup, which removed Manuel Zelaya, we've seen the stonking victory of Xiomara Castro, and we'll be joined by Xiomara Castro's new Secretary of State for the President's Office, hopefully later on the call today. And in Bolivia, we've seen the overturning of a 2019 coup with a fantastic victory for the left as well. And hopefully this year, we'll see even further gains in Brazil, where we're due for an election. And we can see that the left is on the rise against Bolsonaro. So we've got an exciting panel of speakers today. If you enjoy the session, please donate and hit the donate button. The only way we can run sessions like this is through funds that we raise from you. We're a volunteer-led organisation. And I should say too, if you want to express your solidarity today, we've got a statement you can sign up to on Honduras that someone will post in the chat as well. Our first speaker today, with no more conversation from me, I'll move on to our first speaker, is Guillaume. He's the former foreign minister from Ecuador. Over to you, Guillaume, to talk about developments in the region.
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
well,
perfect.
Great. Thank you very much for having me on. Many thanks to Labour Friends of Progressive Latin America for hosting this event. It's a pleasure to be with you. I want to be as brief as possible, but I want to, I generally, I feel optimistic after some very tough years in Latin America. I think we can be cautiously optimistic. There's certainly a wind of change right now in Latin America, with a number of electoral victories and victories for progressives and for the left in Latin America, some of which you just mentioned now, which I think can really make us hopeful and optimistic for a better future. Certainly the last few years have been extremely tough for progressives, tough for leftists, and a number of countries where they've been blatantly persecuted, in some places, going into exile or being locked up, or, a number of right-wing regimes that have really cracked down in a way we hadn't seen since the 60s and 70s. In fact, in ways that are similar from the military regimes of the 60s and 70s, but also tough years for the general population, not only the political leadership of the progressive movements, but people, with a rise of poverty and inequality at a pace we hadn't seen since the 1980s and 90s in the last 3-4 years. There are different statistics that have been thrown around, but certainly between 30 and 40 million people going back into poverty over the last 4 years. This is important if you take into account that roughly between 2000 and 2013, so that 13-year bracket with sort of the heyday of the first pink tide, you had 100 million people in Latin America lifted out of poverty. So in just 13 years, 100 million people lifted out of poverty out of a total Latin American population of 600 million people. It's significant. And now we're talking of at least a third of, not necessarily the same people, but at least a third of that quantity of people lifted out of poverty going back into poverty. So this is really tragic times. And I think in part, we are seeing a return of the left in Latin America, a return of progressives in Latin America, because people didn't want this. They didn't vote for this. In some cases, political fatigue. There's been some talk as well, I think maybe somewhat exaggerated, of the decline in the commodities boom, creating these problems for the left. We could go in the causes and of all that. Maybe we don't have time for this, but certainly from 2014, 2015 onwards, you see a decline of the left. In a number of countries, the left have been in power for a decade. There's some political fatigue there, and people vote for the opposition. Fair enough, legitimate. But what people didn't want is to go back to the neoliberal recipes of the 80s and 90s. And they're demonstrating that now in the polls. In fact, not all the rightward turn was achieved through elections. And some of the governments that came to power, right-wing governments that came to power during this period, were achieved through impeachments and barring candidates from running, sometimes putting candidates in jail in order to prevent them from running. The typical case of Lula in Brazil, which had a big impact in Brazil and on the region. So, all these practices, both undemocratic, authoritarian, but also neoliberal, have now getting more and more punished in the ballot box. And we're seeing a number of victories for progressives, obviously starting, I think, really with Mexico in 2018, and then very symbolically, Argentina return of Peronism in 2019. And more recently, important victories in Bolivia, extremely symbolic after what happened in Bolivia, the coup against Evo in 2019, and a very authoritarian government that was really trying to avoid elections at all costs. And once it had to hold elections, it tried to avoid having the mass on the ballot and all sorts of dubious practices and the authoritarian practices, which we now call lawfare in Latin America, to try and block progressives from participating in democratic politics. So the victory of Bolivia with an even greater margin than Evo Morales' victory in 2019 was highly symbolic, and all that creates a psychological effect, a snowball effect of progressives being emboldened and believing in themselves, and other countries also replicating these results. The big victory in Honduras, you've just mentioned, this is really important because I think maybe Honduras was the most authoritarian example. I mean, there have been a number of authoritarian experiences in Latin America over the last few years, led by an emboldened, very ideological right wing. But in Honduras, it's been 12 years. And it was the first anti-pink tide coup as well. So it's very symbolic, right? When Manuel Zelaya was toppled in 2009, and 12 years later, his wife, Xiomara Castro, elected after 12 years of repression, of extrajudicial executions, of death squads roaming the street and cracking down on activists and trade unionists and so on. It's really probably the most dire example of persecution of the left. And yet they won the elections with a clear mandate and a very important lead in the presidential elections. We're going to have to watch Honduras. It's going to be very important for solidarity networks in the UK, in the world, to be very aware of what's going on in Honduras, because obviously it's a country prone to coups with a very emboldened right wing, also very much in the US sphere of influence. So solidarity there is going to be very important, particularly with what's just happened in the Honduran parliament, with a group of Honduran members of Congress that have already been bought out by right in order to go against Xiomara. So Honduras is an important one. And then, of course, the elections in Chile. Chile being famously the laboratory of neoliberalism, and an authoritarian laboratory of neoliberalism under Pinochet, the poster child of neoliberal reform, of Thatcherism before Thatcher, of Reaganomics before Reagan. This is the victory of an anti-neoliberal left in Chile is really important, and again, very symbolic. Again, I think this really spells on a pink tide 2.0, and we can be cautiously optimistic. And the year 2022 is going to continue being very important because, of course, we have elections in Colombia, where Gustavo Petro and the left have a very clear lead right now, and I think a good chance of winning. It's tough. Colombia is by far the closest, I would say, I think it's fair to say, the closest ally of the United States in the region. It's the most sort of strategic and intricate and I would say incestuous relationship with the US deep state in the Americas. I think really it's the biggest recipient of military aid, the closest intelligence relationship between US security agency, intelligence agencies and Colombian agencies. It's a really tough one. But Petro is clearly in the lead with the polls. The Duque government has been disastrous. And so I think there's a real chance for the left in Colombia, which would be a major game changer because of Colombia's role in that relationship with the United States and its role in the region as being I would say historically a destabilizing force for the left, for its neighbors, for the left in the region, but also because of Colombia's importance in terms of its size, its population. It's the second Spanish-speaking population in the world after Mexico. It's bigger than either Spain or Argentina. It's also it's a very big economy. It's the third economy in Latin America, almost on the par with Argentina now. So Colombia is a big player and would be, I think, a game changer. But the biggest game changer in Latin America will be the Brazilian elections. And I think everything indicates that Lula will win these elections come October 2022. And that is really the sort of litmus test for whether there is a pink tide 2.0. I think Brazil, with Lula at the helm, would really change things, I think, dramatically and really, orchestrate, signify a pendular shift toward progressive politics again in Latin America. And I have to say, I was lucky enough to be able to talk to Lula in Madrid a few months ago when he was in Europe, and I think he's going to have to compromise on the domestic front clearly, because after Bolsonaro, it's the return of democracy and institutions, and I would say even the return of reason. After sort of the terrible sort of neo-fascist government of Bolsonaro. So there's going to be a lot of sort of moderate return to democracy in Brazil. But I think on the geopolitical front, on the international front, I sense Lula really wants Brazil to recuperate its former position as an important global power, and that he really wants to Lula really, when he talks about this a lot, he really wants to reignite Latin American integration, and he doesn't want Latin America to align in this new Cold War between the US and China. He wants to play a different kind of politics, and that I think again is a cause for optimism, because of course there is no pink tide 2.0 if there isn't a new geopolitical bloc, a new Latin American geopolitical bloc. And Lula is interested in reviving UNASUR and giving a lot of importance to CELAC. I think these are the two key organizations in order to be able to speak of a sovereign and an independent Latin America. So I think these are just to finish. I think these are the things we need to watch. I think we can speak of a pink tide 2.0 in as much as there is a bloc of Latin American states defending sovereignty, defending Latin America, not aligning in this new Cold War between the United States and China. And that requires reliving regional organizations such as UNASUR, such as CELAC, and having a sort of alliance of the left in Latin America. Despite the fact, and this is clear, that the left in Latin America was in the past and is still very heterogeneous. So Boric is not the same as Maduro, clearly. AMLO is not the same as Petro, who's not the same as Lula, who's not the same as Fernandez, who's not the same as Arce. So we do have a very heterogeneous left, but there are a few very important commonalities that need to be expressed, particularly at the international level, in defense of a geopolitical Latin America that sort of defends sovereignty, defends non-intervention, no coups, democracy, and those kinds of things, which I think unite all these very different types of left. And then finally, I think another thing we need to watch, of course, is the possibility of renewed campaigns of destabilization, coups. Many of the things that we saw towards the end of the pink tide, because as I said, not all the pink tide governments were replaced by right-wing governments through elections. Right? Many were replaced through coups. Brazil's an example, Honduras an example, Paraguay is an example, Bolivia, until this was overturned with the Arce victory, is an example. So this is not a feature just of the 60s and 70s. These coups are still happening. They're less military, although Bolivia, brings it, or even Honduras brings this into question. But generally speaking, they're a little bit more subtle. They tend to have parliamentary participation. And we've seen, of course, the role of the media and the judiciary in these
One more minute,
campaigns of lawfare playing a huge role in these coups. So, from the point of view of solidarity networks, from the point of view of Labour Friends of Progressive Latin America, from the point of view of all of us on this call, it's very important that we look at this in detail and that we stand ready to act if we see that there's a threat to democracy, a threat to sovereignty in Latin America. Sorry, I spoke too much. Thank you very much.
No, that was fantastic, and thanks for that great overview to get us kicked off from someone who was a sort of central figure in the first pink tide. The next speaker I want to go to is Claudia Turbet-Delof from Wiphalas across the world. Claudia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. It's so amazing to see you all here today. I'm going to talk about this inspirational work by the Bolivian people. Really fantastic to hear to Guillaume as well. Thanks, Guillaume. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of summary of this inspirational work that has happened since the recovery of democracy in Bolivia, and also pay some homage as well to our all the fallen during the coup d'etat in Bolivia. Now, thanks to the heroic resistance of the Bolivian people, the de facto dictatorship of Janine Áñez was forced to hold elections, which led to the election of the MASI PCP candidate, President Luis Arce, which in turn led to the cessation of repression, the recuperation of democracy, the reactivation of the economy, and the bringing to justice to all of those who perpetrated acts of corruption and violated human rights. I'm really delighted to inform you that the authorities, following due process, have brought dozens of individuals to face justice. Now, all of the social and political rights suppressed under Janine Áñez have been fully restored. The very first measures taken by President Arce were to focus on the most vulnerable through a set of social benefits such as bonus against hunger and other such benefits that are benefiting over 5 million people in Bolivia in a population of 11 million people. So this is big numbers. And all public works suspended under Áñez regime have been reactivated. A tax on the very rich and very successful one that has brought recuperated a lot of income to the country, as well as a return of the VAT and so forth, have really proved to be highly beneficial. Now, health and education have been prioritized, with each category being allocated more than 10% in a national budget for 2022. Unemployment has fallen over from 12% to 5%, and the economy is solidly taking off. Now, in the second semester of the 2021, the economy grew by 9.4%, with a commercial surplus of $1,584 million. Thus, the Economic Commission for Latin America projects a rate economic growth of over 5% for 2022. Now, this puts Bolivia among the countries with the highest rates of economic growth in Latin America. So this is really good news for the Bolivian people, and indeed for Latin America. Now, the economy is organized around the process of industrialization. I think this is really important to also mention. And this has been done through the See Bolivia program, which is a strategy of industrialization through import substitution, including, among other things, the full industrialization of the extraction of lithium of Bolivia benefits directly from the export of semi-processed lithium rather than exporting only as a raw material. Now, another important dimension of Bolivia's current reality is the health program of mass vaccination. And this has been done hugely, it's a huge success as well, because during the Janine Áñez regime, this had not even commenced, and we had even heard people dying on the streets. In fact, it was widely reported that over 400 people had died on the streets. So it wasn't a priority for Janine Áñez. In fact, they closed down hospitals because it was painted in the color that she didn't want them, and so on. definitely human rights abuses. Now, because of the work done with under Presidente Arce's, nearly 6 million people have been fully vaccinated. And the vaccination of children has also commenced. And over 90% of teachers, health workers, and some key categories of public sector workers have also been vaccinated. Now, the government has already contracted the purchase of over 22 million vaccines doses as well. Now, all of this is administered free of charge. Kind of coming to the end, just a couple of more important facts that I wanted to share with you today. One of them is also that, of course, all of this phenomenal work is happening since the recovery of democracy in Bolivia, but also the extreme right continues to try to mobilize and trying to use the undemocratic efforts aimed at ousting through violence the government of President Arce. But something phenomenal happened in response to this, and this is part of this phenomenal inspirational movements that happen in Latin America and all over the world. We got something to learn from. And is that Bolivia led no small march, a gigantic march that started with 5,000 people in Caracollo, Oruro, and they moved all the way to La Paz. They walked for 7 full days, all day, a total of 188 kilometers. And this march was denominated La Marcha por la Patria, March for the Homeland. This march was led by President Evo Morales and also President Arce and Vice President David Choquehuanca. Now, it started with 5,000 people. It ended with an estimated 1.5 million people, but it mobilized roughly 3 million people in Bolivia. The march was denominated, "We will never allow another coup d'etat in Bolivia." And that's hugely inspirational. Now, to end today's this great space and platform that you have given us, we want to also mention that the democracy that has been recovered and is bringing justice to the perpetrators, so just bringing to justice perpetrators of human rights violation during the Yanine Áñez dictatorship, is also being pursued and is constant and is being pursued by the relevant authorities. There was a brutal repression unleashed under Yanine Áñez regime against especially indigenous women that killed 37 people in Sencata, Sacaba, Pedregal, with over 800 injured, 1,500 incarcerated. And this comes along coupled with a witch hunt that was also perpetrated against Masi PCP and the social movements. Now, this has left a large number of victims who rightly demand justice is done. An example of this is a very courageous and phenomenal visit that Iben Huaranca did in Europe not long ago when he attended the recent Committee Against Torture in the United Nations, where he publicly gave his testimony about the horrendous tortures that he experienced during Yanine Áñez. It was the Committee Against Torture that also said that all these groups like Unión Juvenil Cruceñista and Juvenil Cochala in Cochabamba, they are paramilitary groups. Now, we want to pay homage to all the victims of the coup, and we want to say that, yes, we will not stop until we seek justice. I think I have just under a minute left, and I wanted to say that because of this, because of what I said earlier about the developments of Bolivia, and because of the continuous seeking of justice and all the people that have been taken to justice as well, very soon we're going to start hearing of the case against Yanine Áñez taken to court, which is led by Lydia Patti, a very courageous indigenous woman. Please, as always, I bring homework for everyone. Please keep an eye on this. Support the Latin American movement. It's very important for us because press is always a limitation, and it's important that within our networks, we always share what we do. Very soon, there will be a documentary called Revolución de las Wiphalas, the revolution of the Wiphalas, that will come probably to your screens very soon, so we do need your support. So that's what I wanted to add today. last message, we Bolivians, we will never regress back to colonialism. Hayaya Bolivia, Hayaya the plurinational state, and the peoples of Bolivia. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the view from Bolivia, Claudia. That was fantastic, and I saw the March for the Homeland reported, and it was really inspirational. Really great. If you want to get more involved with campaigning on Bolivia, please do follow Friends of Bolivia on their social media and check out the website. I'm going to go to the next speaker, who was originally not going to be next on the bill, but I understand, true to his internationalist form, he's currently at an international conference, and so might need to go. He was a fantastic leader of the opposition. I think he would have made an even more fantastic prime minister, and he has been a lifelong friend of the Latin American people. Over to you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you very much for having me on the call. And my greetings to everyone on the call. And Claudia, thank you for what you just said from Bolivia, and all the best to you. And the huge progress that I know you're making in Bolivia. Your election victory was amazing, but what's even more amazing is the presence and image that you give of how the country can and will further transform into one that's inclusive of all of its people, all of its languages, and all of its fantastic cultural history. And that is what is the inspiration around the world, and the contribution Bolivia makes in so many ways: non-proliferation treaty, COP26, and so much else. So thank you very much, and my best wishes to you in Bolivia in the struggles that you're going through. And I was listening earlier to what Guillaume was saying, and the work that he's put in, and the strength of courage that he's brought to the whole issues facing Latin America. Now, some might say, well, why are we talking about Latin America? Well, I was doing a meeting this morning about tax justice, and it seems to me that the issues of justice and economic justice are fundamental to the growth of the left across Latin America. The reason that Gabriel Boric was elected as president of Chile was as much to do with the poverty of many people in Chile, the hopes of those that are or were students of what they can do with their lives, and of the indigenous people of Chile, particularly the Mapuche people. Obviously, I have highest in my mind at that point. And his victory is confirmation that despite everything the world's media and the world's banking system has thrown at each country, it hasn't really worked, because the strength of popular opinion is there in Chile, is there in Argentina, there in Bolivia, and absolutely there in Brazil, where obviously we hope that Lula will be elected president once again. And part of the reason of his election will be that the people, the poorest people in Chile, remember with affection his presidency as one that tried to do something about the horrendous levels of rural poverty and the very unfair distribution of land. And I was very impressed during COP26 of a meeting that we held with people from Brazil, from the Amazon region, as well as from Rio. Now, if you believe what you read in some of the British press, you would be told that everybody in Rio wants to occupy the Amazon region, and everybody in the Amazon region hates everybody in Rio. It's complete nonsense, absolute nonsense. The people in Rio want to live in a clean environment, just like the people of Amazonas want to see their environment protected from the kind of awful development that's going on at the moment, including the burning of the rainforest. There was such solidarity between them. I was very impressed by it, and the very intelligent discussion and debate that took place. And so it is for us, I think, to give our support and our solidarity to each government that is elected as it goes through the obvious difficulties that they face. And when Gabriel Boric becomes formally president of Chile next month, he's got a huge fight on his hands. all those vested interests that were there all those years ago to topple the Allende government haven't completely gone away. He knows that, the people on the streets know that, but he does have this huge electoral mandate to bring about social justice for the poorest people in Chile, and I'm sure that is what is going to happen, but it does need our solidarity. Last month, I was in Mexico and had a number of very interesting meetings with people in unions as well as in government, and I attended the daily press conference that President López Obrador has. And I was interested in his whole strategy of reducing poverty and inequality and injustice. And I was just thinking of the poverty that so many children grow up in Mexico, in Central America, indeed throughout Latin America. There's a sort of chiclets generation of kids who grow up in inadequate housing, inadequate access to education, and their only occupation is trying to sell small quantities of goods on the street in order to help their families to be able to eat. Poverty is a most chronic, terrible waste of life, waste of the skills those kids could develop if they had decent housing and decent education. How many of those kids could have been doctors, could have been engineers, could have been nurses, could have been so many other things, but are not because of the poverty in which they're brought up. It's that grotesque inequality that has to be challenged. Yet, you look at the world's economic advisors, read the Financial Times and others, and you'll read all about what the International Monetary Fund thinks, what the Group of Seven think, and they think it's time for the world to go into global austerity in order to pay for the COVID pandemic. Well, they're absolutely, totally wrong. What we need is a period of redistribution of wealth. And the conference I've been at today is about tax justice. It is about the billions that are stashed away in tax havens around the world. It is about the way in which global corporations take the minerals out of the ground in one country, try and avoid the tax there, so they move their theoretical business somewhere else and end up paying tax in a tax haven where their theoretical head office is based. We need some transparency. We need country by country reporting on the activities of every corporation, and no one government can do it on its own. It has to be a collective endeavor across Latin America, just as much as across Europe and Africa. And so I think it's those things we need to look at. A couple more things to just quickly say before I move on. I was very impressed that in Mexico, President Obrador called a meeting of the heads of government of all Central and South American and Caribbean countries as a way of saying, well, actually, we are an entity in ourselves. We need to trade with each other, but we have massive economic issues that we have to face. And that economic inequality and poverty leads to massive refugee flows, massive numbers of people trying to escape the poverty of Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, and so on, in order to get to Mexico, in order to get to the USA. That should not be a solution to their lives and their issue. The solution ought to be fair economic development and fair distribution of power and wealth in those countries. I wish the new government of Honduras well, and I think it started very well by announcing a presidential decree of free electricity for the poorest households. I wish President Obrador well in his very good decision to say that lithium will be mined by a state-owned company for the benefit of the people of Mexico. It won't be handed over to a global corporation to mine it. And it is that sense of public enterprise and public endeavor that is so important. And so in our solidarity, it's a solidarity based on human rights, on peace and on justice. And in the Peace and Justice Project, we are very keen to work with Progressive International in supporting radical movements, empowering radical movements, and above all, taking solidarity action in Britain. So when the British government tries to sign trade deals with different countries around the world, Let's scrutinise those very, very carefully, because I can't be the only person on this call that doesn't trust Boris Johnson to tell us the absolute truth about what he's up to. I'm sorry to be so controversial here, but Boris Johnson claims that the trade deals would all respect the environment and human rights and be fair trade deals. I really don't believe a word of it. And so we have to be very vigilant and very active in that solidarity. And I'll finish with this. Those people that are, excuse me, those people that are refugees around the world, those people that are living in desperate poverty, either to get to Europe from North Africa, from Libya, or to get from France into Britain across the English Channel, they're all human beings. They want to live. They want to contribute to this planet just as much as Guatemalan women on the borders of Guatemala and Mexico, or Guatemala and the USA want to live and want to be able to contribute to our world. So we need a mindset which is about inclusive of everybody, and not thinking that economic development equals the enrichment of the richest at the expense of the poorest. That is what the tide, the human tide of change across Latin America is all about. And you know what? It's a very exciting time for Latin America. Let's all be part of it and make some changes here as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Yeah, and I think you're totally right to kind of highlight what we can do here and why it's so important to do things in Britain, especially because of what we're discussing today, the kind of coup in Bolivia. There was a kind of international consensus that was like okay, and and same in Honduras, and obviously British support for the coup in Chile. So it's vital we hold our government to account as well. And I should just say to people who are watching, if you want to hear more about the Peace and Justice Project, you can see kind of links to it in the chat as well. And please do follow those and get involved and see what the Peace and Justice Project are doing. Next, I want to go to Sue Gray, who can tell you a little bit more about how you can get involved in kind of campaigning for Latin America in Britain. So it's really great to have that kind of segue from Jeremy to Sue.
Okay. Thanks very much, Sam. Just a word about Labour Friends of Progressive Latin America. It was set up for Labour MPs, party members, trade unionists and supporters to build solidarity with social and progressive movements in Latin America and to oppose external intervention. And the aim is to ensure that Labour voices are heard on key issues and developments in the region as they happen. It's great to have so many people taking part today. It's very uplifting as to see such a large number of people tuning in as we're building solidarity for these progressive struggles. Now, I'm sure you all know that these events, hosting these events isn't cheap. It does cost some money. So I'm here really to appeal for you to donate £10 if you can, or whatever you can afford. And the link to donate will be posted in the chat. And the funds that we collect, we need to collect funds because we're not a membership organisation, so we don't have a subscription income. So we do rely on occasional donations, and they help us to continue the work in raising awareness and support for movements across the region. And without your support, we wouldn't be able to put on events like this. So thank you very much for anything that you can give. Now, I also want to mention some important things that you can do, actions that you can take to help the campaign. Now, petitions. With the recent historic election victory in Honduras, which we've already heard about, this ended 12 years of far-right coup government. And we're calling for a big show of solidarity with the newly elected president, Xiomara Castro, and the movement behind her, and the fight for progressive change in Honduras. So please, could you add your name to the public statement? And the link is being posted in the chat now. We're also supporting the Brazil Solidarity Initiative. As has been said, that is really, really important at the moment with the elections coming up later this year. And the Solidarity Initiative is building international support for former President Lula and the resistance movement against Bolsonaro. The elections would be a huge battleground against the far right globally. So please add your name to the BSI Elections 2022 statement. And again, the link is being posted in the chat. Finally, could I draw your attention to an event coming up hosted by Labour Outlook? And that's taking place on Monday, the 28th of February. And it's Why Socialists Learn from Cuba's Revolution and Latin America's Struggle. And that's taking place with a number of speakers. There'll be Natasha Hickman from Cuba Solidarity Campaign, Roger McKenzie from Liberation, Matt Wilgress from Labour Outlook, and other speakers to be announced. I'll be there as well, and I hope you can all join me at that meeting. And the link to the register, I think, is being posted in the chat right now. So thank you all once again for your support today. So please remember, there's three things. Sign up to all the petitions and so on. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. And also, finally, please donate to show your support for Labour Friends of Progressive Latin America and help us continue our campaigning work. Thank you very much.
Thanks, C. Yeah, please do donate, and that event on Cuba looks absolutely fantastic. So I hope you can make that too. Our next speaker is another good Labour friend of Latin America. She recently She recently travelled to Brazil on a delegation over to Brazil. And she is the chair of Young Labour. I'm going to hand you over to Jess Barnard. Jess, over to you.
Hi, Sam. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. I don't know how I'm going to kind of cover this in 6 minutes, so bear with me as I do my best. I'm maybe speaking quickly. But yes, so I was really, really fortunate enough to travel out to Brazil in December. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the things I learned there, some of the lessons that the young members of the Workers' Party wanted me to take back to our members here. But first of all, there was a strong call for me to give our support and solidarity from Lula himself to his friends in England, as he said. So passing that on as a priority. So I guess I wanted to just, set the scene for anyone who isn't aware of like the history of Brazil. So in 2003, Lula was elected president of Brazil, where he was able to pass a number of policies which have just transformed the lives of working class people across Brazil. And that emotion is really felt by the young people there. And meeting with them, most notably, the thing that they talked about is the creation of universities, of housing, free education for young people, no matter their financial situation, and completely transforming their lives and how they feel, their future could pan out. And so there is such a enthusiasm and devotion to those kinds of policies. So in 2017, Lula was sentenced to 9 years in prison after being accused of corruption charges, which were later found to be false, which in turn kind of ended up with the election of the far-right president, Bolsonaro. And a kind of resentment that they are kind of fighting on the ground towards politics and towards politicians, and a distrust in kind of a wrecking behaviour. And at the time of the imprisonment, Young Labour National Committee, in solidarity with Lula and the Workers' Party of Brazil, we voted to make Lula our president. So he remains to this day. So you check it out on Wikipedia, it says Lula is Young Labour UK's president. And Lula was able to smuggle a letter to us from prison, which he just remained so determined and so resolute, and it was just wonderful to be able to communicate with him at such a difficult time and offer our solidarity to their movement. So obviously it was real honour to be invited out to Sao Paulo in December to attend the Young Workers' Party Congress and the International Seminar. And the impact of Bolsonaro and the far-right government is felt immediately on the ground. Poverty is absolutely everywhere. Support services have been completely stripped back to the bare bones. There's a huge reliance on, voluntary services, which are just completely overwhelmed. There is regular police brutality, which target the poorest areas of Brazil, predominantly sees young Black boys being shot or beaten by police with no justice given. And there's, of course, a jobs crisis worsened by the pandemic, and a real kind of fear around, if you get sick, not having that job security and not having access to good healthcare. And so obviously with all of these issues and this lived experience of these conditions across Brazil, but also, the belief and the confidence in not just Lula, but the Workers' Party and their political project, the youth wing of the Workers' Party has been extremely busy building a very disciplined, a very energized movement, which is very serious about taking control of their own future and building to ensure that this never happens again. And so in the third day of my trip, I was able to attend the rally of the Youth Congress, which was absolutely electric and definitely made me think back to the rallies Jeremy held and spoke at in 2017. Rooms absolutely heaving, and people were so inspired by the work that was being done, but also Lula's words himself. And in his keynote speech, Lula said to the young workers, something that really stuck with me, which was that it is no use being rebellious in front of the computer screen. We have to know that being rebellious is taking action. It's moving, and moving is choosing people who are committed to the Brazilian people so that we can change this country. I haven't got much time left, so I'm going to kind of just skip to some lessons that the young workers wanted me to take back. And firstly was very, very clearly a commitment to internationalism and building this for the future. And the youth wing in particular doesn't see international socialist solidarity as some kind of afterthought or fringe issue that we often are told it is by the right of our own party. And it's so often presented as a distraction and something that working class people don't care about. But to the young workers in Brazil, it's absolutely fundamental for ensuring its future, for building that solidarity, and to ensure freedom from imperialist powers and ensure their future autonomy. I think that's a really incredible message for us, and something that we should always keep in mind as we organise to support our siblings internationally. And another thing was to focus on learning the lessons and learning about what went wrong. And I think often we do fail to talk about what went wrong for us, because when we won the leadership, which is obviously brilliant, we were very unexpected. It was very unexpected, and a lot of us were unprepared. And we focused often on one or two individual issues rather than building our broad projects. So as activists, we wouldn't always focus on building those groups locally and building those spaces where we could have those discussions. And this is something that they wanted to say was extremely important, and they were focusing on like a snowflake model of organizing, ensuring that there were these groups across the country. And the young workers of Brazil take Lula's warnings very seriously. In his keynote speech, he sort of scolded some of them for skipping class. But he said very clearly, you must be ready. And they understood that as, they need to be ready to build this strategic intersectional movement, which has at its core a focus on worker organising and workplace organising. And it's a very, very serious project. This is a youth wing serious about how it equips its members and how it can push back against vicious attacks, whether that be from the media or the far right or international powers. And that's definitely something I think we should take on board as we build for our future. And lastly, I think they said education is a weapon, and political education should be at the heart of all of our projects as we rebuild for the future. So when Lula was in prison, they said they were very low, but they knew they had to organise to fight back, and that is how we win. And I wanted to end with just a few words that Lula had written to us, which I think chime with where we are as the left now, and give us hope that things can turn around. And this was, I feel rejuvenated by my nomination to the honorary presidency of Young Labour. This honour proves above all that One is only old when he abandons the dreams of his youth, and I will never abandon mine. It also proves that injustice exists everywhere and that workers' struggles are the same across the world. The consequences of the rise of the far right in Brazil are felt in the flesh by our people and are being broadcast to the whole world through the images of the Amazon in flames and police helicopters firing into the poorest communities of Rio. All of this causes me immense pain, but it does not make me give up. One day, justice will be done and I will leave prison all the more willing to fight for our dream, the one shared by young people of all ages, the creation of a better world. And of course, Lula is now free. He has a 17-point lead over Bolsonaro, looking set to win the presidency later this year. And we need to do everything we can to show our solidarity and to support this incredible political project, but also take hope that things can turn around and that we can change this if we get rebuilding.
Thanks, Jess. That's fantastic. What an inspiring quote as well, to kind of move us into the next speaker. Thanks so much for that and for the report you gave on your delegation. It's worth saying that we've got over 1,000 people on the call, which is fantastic to have that many people across the different kind of platforms we're broadcasting on, tuning into this. And as Jess just said, it's really vital that we make those connections. So do make sure that you sign up to the Honduras petition and that you're clicking through on the links that are being posted in the chat and hitting that donate button too as well in the chat. I also need to offer apologies from Rodolfo Pastor. Rodolfo was a member of the transition committee in Honduras. He has just today been made the Secretary of State for the Office of the President, and because of this, he's unfortunately got to step up to his role and so can't make it onto the call. So he sends his apologies and solidarity. So unfortunately, we won't be hearing from him. But our next and final speaker of the evening is Manuel Reisco. Manuel is a civil industrial engineer. He has a master in economics from the University of Chile, has a PhD in political economy at the Institute of Social Sciences of the Russian Academy, and he is vice president of the Center for National Studies of Alternative Development, CENDA. He's an expert on Chile's neoliberal capitalism, and he's here today to update us on the situation in Chile and the advances that have been made there. So Manuel, I'm passing over to you.
Thank you very much, Sam, and really thanks to labor friends of progressive movements in Latin America, and very especially to Jeremy Corbyn, which for Chileans, and particularly for Chileans from my generation, is a true friend, which we will never forget. Thanks all of you and our viewers and participants for this opportunity to talk, reflect, have a conversation on history and tides. Well, of course, it's millenary knowledge, wisdom, that history moves in a sort of dance between those below, the people whose work produces everything in all societies, and those above, the elites that have the historical obligation of organizing society and production, and several other obligations. And of course, they keep part of the riches produced by the working people for themselves, but for these purposes also. And of course, it's a sort of dance between these two main actors that usually moves on the elite and the small fights among the different fractions of the elite. But in time to time, those from below, the working people, erupt massively in the political scene. And they resolve the constant fights among those in the elite in favor of those fractions that are willing to make the necessary reforms so that society as a whole will continue a work of progress. That's millenary wisdom. In the 19th century, the sociology, political economy of the 19th century taught us this breakthrough wisdom in historical knowledge, that in these eruptions of those below, from below, of these eruptions of the people, they make history, but not in their arbitrary desires, but according to the different stages which the progress of humanity has been developing in the different societies. And the early 20th century political science discovered a very important factor in this movement, and that's tides. That is tides. These eruptions of the people in the political scenery do not move, let's say, arbitrarily. They follow a certain path. They follow tides, certain tides. And this is a physical phenomena, because when you have lots of individuals moving, for example, in the economy, we have millions of enterprises around the world, and each one moves by its own. But somehow they tend to move one another, influencing one another in a very complex way, but they tend to move in a certain direction, in once and in a certain direction another way. And for example, in economic theory, the cyclical movement of capitalism was discovered in the 19th century, but the secular movement of the world economy, the developed economy, was discovered in the early 20th century by Kondratiev, of these long tides in the economical movement, which of course no economist cannot take into account. And when, of course, this is hugely important because, for example, one thinks, how is it that somehow these political tides seem to be coordinated? For example, in the 60s worldwide, and now, for example, in these years in Latin America, we have been working. Well, I think Guillaume mentioned it in his fantastic overview of the process we are living through. But I think this has much to do with the fact that we are all moving in the same time, and it has to do with the commodity super cycle that somehow moves counterface with the secular economic movement. Well, tides. And I think that in the Chilean case, our generation has the privilege of participating in 3 of the big popular pushes into political activity. And these three instances in Chile were in the 60s and early 70s, and that's where the peasantry moved in massively, and we had our revolution. But then we had our counter-revolution, our Waterloo, let's say, our terrible defeat, and the restoration. And the restoration took very long time. And it was necessary for two different tides of popular activity to end it. And the first one ended the dictatorship. But it didn't end the second part that took place of the restoration that took place in democratic governments. But that has started to end now. And that started to end with a large eruption of the people in political activity since October 18th, 2019. And this will take a long time to finish. And we have had two great victories. Is the election of the convention, and now the election of the Boric government. As you said, it's a struggle, a long struggle, but we are very confident that this tide of popular presence in political scenery will stay long enough to finish the restoration and, well, enter modern times accordingly.
Thank you, Manuel. That was a fantastic kind of a real masterclass in how to go from the sort of political theory to the actual practice in a very short period of time. So yeah, thank you so much for that overview, and that kind of concludes the session for today. Like I said, if you've enjoyed today, make sure you click through on the links that you saw in the chat. Make sure that you donate, and hopefully we'll see you at our Cuba meeting, or Labour Outlook, our sister media partners meeting at the end of the month. But yeah, thanks all for joining, and we'll see you soon. Goodbye.